Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dublin Castle and to this very special event to commemorate our volunteers. We're here in this wonderful and historic venue to acknowledge and celebrate the outstanding contribution of our volunteers, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Barbara Nick-Engasa, and I am the Assistant Secretary responsible for Community Development in the Department of Rural and Community Development. Because of the very large number of volunteers who assisted with numerous initiatives throughout the country, including taking part in the community call, we can't all be together in person this evening. But I do know that this event is being live streamed around the country to enable as many volunteers as possible to join in. So as well as welcoming you here, those of you who are here in Dublin Castle, I would like to welcome all of you who are attending from around the country, from your locally based celebrations up and down the country. And I know that our Minister, the Minister for Rural and Community Development, Heather Humphreys, is joining in the celebrations from her local venue in Monaghan. So we have volunteers joining us from north, south, east and west, and we're all of one mind and one purpose this evening: to honour and celebrate our volunteers. It's a thank you tonight to all of you who, through your dedication, enthusiasm and commitment, made a real difference to the lives of those that you engage with. So, just lost my page, sorry. The last few years have emphasised more than ever the real need for people at a local level to provide support to those most vulnerable in our communities. And volunteers have been at the heart of that effort, and they have been at the coalface all the time throughout the most difficult times for our country. So, to kick things off tonight, I would like to welcome our host here in Dublin Castle this evening, the Minister of State with responsibility for Community Development and Charities, Minister Joe O'Brien, to open the proceedings. You're very welcome, Minister.
Wow. Good evening, everyone. Delighted to welcome you here this evening to host this event to acknowledge the immense contribution volunteers made during the pandemic. I'd like to take a moment as well to welcome all of you who are tuning in from all over the country tonight, be it from at home or at a local celebration event. I hope you have an enjoyable evening, and apologies for the delay. I got waylaid chatting to one or two people. This is an event of celebration of volunteering and acknowledgement and thanks for your work. Personally, I never thought I'd be hosting an event in Dublin Castle, but I'm really happy that it's this event. Personally, volunteering has changed my life for the better, as some of the most positive and impactful experiences in my life have been volunteering ones. I volunteered as an athlete's assistant in the Paralympics in Sydney a good few years ago. I've worked as a human rights observer in Palestine, and most recently with my kids I've helped to plant and maintain a community orchard nearby where I live. But I'm especially happy that we're acknowledging volunteering in a significant and big way here this evening, because I've seen its power and impact through my 20 years of working in the community voluntary sector, but especially in the last 2 years since I became a minister, and I've had the opportunity to see so much of the work that has been done nationally by volunteers. We're here to celebrate the many and varied acts of generosity which made so many lives bearable during a very difficult time for our country. When people were advised to cocoon, to remain safe and out of harm's way, you faced risk, you faced uncertainty to make life better for those in your community. Ireland has a long history of volunteers and volunteering, and we have a rich tradition of pooling our skills and resources to provide services and events, strengthen our communities and ourselves in the process. Without volunteers, we would find it very hard, for example, to run sports clubs, cultural pursuits, befriending services, or so many of the community associations we value and need. COVID-19 and the necessary restrictions threatened our sense of community. Quarantining and isolating, although protecting us from a communicable disease, did create fear, loneliness, and separation for many of us. Your generosity, your tenacity, your practicality minimised the suffering for so many people. Knowing that someone will bring food, medication, or newspapers enabled those living alone or in remote circumstances to maintain some sense of normality in a very abnormal world. Those kind exchanges meant the world to many. Calling people either on the phone or at the window, minimising their aloneness, and that made those days, long days, easier to endure. I would like to take a moment to share with you the reason why we're all here today with some of the examples of volunteering during the pandemic. These stories summarise the countless examples of dedication and COVID-19 related volunteering and simply demonstrate why we as a government, a society and community are taking this opportunity to say thank you. Alison Church is a +1 mentor. She works with an at-risk young person and attends weekly sessions with her young person. Alison and her mentee have met and engaged in sessions online throughout the pandemic. Each week, Alison would create innovative ways to engage the young person and build a relationship with them. They now meet weekly in person and are loving cooking and baking together. Joseph Bennett organised and delivered hot meals for 68 vulnerable people in his housing estate and did shopping for some of the group, all while still working full-time. He created virtual events and competitions such as colouring, St. Patrick's Day Parade, Easter egg hunt and fun competitions for 200 young people and got funding to cover the costs through Fingal County Council, Empower and other sponsors. He also created a walking route in the estate to encourage everyone to get 30 minutes exercise every day. He planted flowers in large areas, painted walls that had graffiti and kept the estate clean to brighten up residents' days. Anne Elliott helped St. Joseph Shankill to facilitate visiting for residents and their loved ones. She was volunteering before the pandemic but changed her role. She welcomes visitors by checking them in, asking screening questions, answering their questions and creating a welcoming place for them. Nursing homes have been particularly impacted by COVID, and Anne's support meant that visits could be facilitated for as many people as possible. Terry Fitzgerald volunteered during the first 2 lockdowns to provide essential home maintenance to marginalised and vulnerable people cocooning due to the pandemic and unable to maintain their homes due to ill health. These essential services included deep cleaning and decluttering, providing comfort to those isolating, that they could live comfortably and cleanly during the pandemic. So these are just a few examples of COVID-19 volunteering. We're lifted by the commitment to befriending otherwise isolated people, delivering food, library books, meals on wheels and personal care, without which the lives of so many would have been intolerable. And I can't speak about volunteering during COVID-19 without acknowledging the volunteers who worked to support and run the vaccination and testing centres. I think most of the people of Ireland would have come into contact with the volunteers who welcomed and guided us through the various testing and vaccination centres. We all experienced firsthand the level of enthusiasm and good humour of the many volunteer stewards without whom our testing and vaccine programmes would never have worked. Their friendly greetings, reassurance and willingness to help shone through the masks, which comforted many of us as we went through the process. Some centres were even lucky enough to have live music from volunteers, which I'm sure made the experience even better, and we have one of the musicians here tonight as well. I'm proud that my department is to the fore of supporting volunteering and implementing the National Volunteer Strategy, which I launched in December 2020. A key part of the strategy is about government recognising the unique value and contribution of volunteers to Irish society, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate your contribution this evening. The fact that 75% of people volunteered in some way during the recent COVID-19 restrictions is a strong indicator of the generosity and the determination of the people of Ireland to share, to be a part of communities and to benefit others. It gives me great hope and optimism to know that people of every age, gender, ethnicity and background volunteer in order to make a practical contribution to their communities. The National Volunteering Strategy's vision of a society where volunteering is promoted, valued, facilitated and supported so that people can contribute to developing and maintaining vibrant, inclusive and sustainable communities is well reflected in your involvement and your ceaseless efforts. It's important also to acknowledge that Taoiseach Micheál Martin was delighted to write to you all directly on behalf of the Government and the people of Ireland in recognition and appreciation of your contribution to the COVID effort. Personally, I'm very eager to promote a sense of understanding and appreciation of volunteering from a young age. So with Volunteering Ireland, we devised a competition asking children to illustrate what volunteering means to them. And I have to say we were astounded by the thoughtful and thought-provoking images from children all over Ireland showing what volunteering means to them and to all of us. I hope that the beautifully designed commemorative badge you've received this evening will remind you of the gratitude and admiration of your peers, the recognition that you are valued and that your efforts have made a huge difference. The design you are wearing tonight is by Nora of St. Paul's National School in Coolooney, County Sligo, who's here in front today. I'd also like to acknowledge the other regional winners, Nicole and Kyra, who are here with us tonight as well. But also Junina, Rebecca and Laurie, who couldn't unfortunately make it here tonight. Well done to you too. Back in March 2020, the country was called upon to step up and the response by volunteers was staggering. Thousands of volunteers in communities across Ireland came forward to provide help. Your goodwill, generosity and selfless hard work meant that the most vulnerable members of our communities were supported during the pandemic. Volunteers, you fulfil an extraordinary role. You show us that when times are hardest, the best of us show up, ready to help. I want to conclude this evening by thanking each and every one of you for your dedication and for your valued contribution. But that's not the conclusion of the evening. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and I enjoy talking to you as well. It's fantastic to see a room full of people as well. I'm glad we waited to do this. We were thinking about doing it earlier, but we thought we would wait until we could get people into a room, and I think I'm glad we waited. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister, for those inspiring words. And so I would now like to welcome Ms. Nina Arwitz, who is the Chief Executive of Volunteer Ireland. And for those of you who don't know Nina, I think it would be fair to say that without Nina's determination and advocacy for volunteers, volunteer centres and everything to do with volunteering, I don't think we would be here this evening. So you're very welcome, Nina.
Thank you very much for those very kind words. Good evening, everyone. So, my name is Nina. I work with Volunteer Ireland. Volunteer Ireland is the National Volunteer Development Organisation, and we work with a network of 29 local volunteer centres who do most of the hard work of actually matching people who want to volunteer with organisations that need volunteers. And they played a huge role throughout COVID in recruiting volunteers and making sure that they had a good volunteer experience responding to COVID. So before I start, I'd also like to say a quick thank you to the Department for Rural and Community Development and Minister Joe O'Brien. We're so happy that you decided to host this event and to recognise the huge role that volunteers played during COVID. So thank you very much for this lovely evening. We're all delighted to be here. So I was thinking about what I was going to say this evening, and it made me think back to March 2020. I'm sure you can all think of what you were doing in those days when I think it was March the 12th when the Taoiseach announced that most of the country was shutting down. And I remember being in the office and we were all told to go home, and two of my colleagues said, "Oh, we're going to go for lunch because, we might not be back in the office for a couple of days." Little did they know. And then I remember sitting at my kitchen table, suddenly working at my kitchen table, trying to figure out what does this mean for volunteering, and what's our role in this? What should we be doing, and what should volunteers, could or should volunteers do? And then part of the answer came from the department, where I got a call. It's actually from Barbara herself saying, could you mobilize 5,000 volunteers? And I said, yeah, I usually try to say yes when I get a question from the department. Yeah, I'm sure we could do that. So we sent out an email. We have the National Volunteering Database, IVOL. So we sent out an email to everyone there, and we put up stuff on social media too, asking people to volunteer and fill out a simple form about, what they could do and their health and driving and stuff like that. And in no time at all, we had over 20,000 people who'd said yes. And then suddenly the worry became, what are we going to ask these people to do? It was so early days. None of us knew what was happening. This was in the days none of us were wearing masks yet. We all were obsessed about, surfaces instead. And we had no idea what was going to happen. We didn't know there was going to be a vaccine. And we didn't really know what these volunteers were going to do. And I kind of started worrying that, we'd have nothing for them to do. And you all probably know if you put your hand up to offer to help, and then nobody takes that up, you get annoyed. I was worried about people getting put off volunteering from all this. But then over the coming weeks, it became really clear that there was a huge need for volunteers. And the kind of volunteering that happened was just immense and so broad. So there's, the shopping, people who did shopping for people who were cocooning, people who got prescriptions, people who delivered hot meals, people who drove patients to appointments in hospitals, people who couldn't leave their home themselves but sewed masks from their homes. There was the test center volunteers, and then later on the vaccination volunteers that obviously played a huge, huge role. There was volunteer interpreters who we engaged to interpret, to get out public health messages in minority languages to specific communities. There were volunteer dog walkers who walked dogs for people who couldn't leave their home. Social inclusion was, social isolation was obviously a really big issue, and there were volunteers who wrote letters to people in nursing homes. There were volunteers who delivered library books to people. There were volunteers who put on online classes so that people would feel connected and have something to do. Big organizations like Alone and Aware did a huge amount of work to just shift their entire volunteer program so they could continue providing their services via telephone and virtually from volunteers' homes. So it was just immense what happened. And I guess the thing that strikes me is all those volunteers and all of you here in this room, well, first of all, the bravery of doing what you did. Back then, in the early days especially, we were seeing scary pictures of people in Italy, people in China. Nobody knew what this virus was going to do. Nobody knew if it was going to go better or worse. And you went out there, in spite of that, to help other people. I think that is pure bravery, really. And then the second thing is the commitment. It wasn't, one-off volunteering is great, but it wasn't just one-off for many of you. You kept going, even though, you would have had your own worries at home, your own kids to homeschool, that joy, your own worries about your jobs and the future, all that stuff. And still, you went out and helped other people. That kind of commitment is really amazing. And then I guess the third thing I think about is just the good spirit you brought. Talked earlier about the piano players in the vaccination centers, but that really changed the whole atmosphere of people going to get their vaccination, people who were scared. And not just the piano players, but just there's a special spirit and energy that volunteers bring that people who are paid just don't, because no matter how good you are, when you're a volunteer, you're doing this just because you want to help people. And it changes everything. And I think it played a huge role in changing the atmosphere and kind of lifting the spirit of the nation. So this evening is all about saying thank you to all of you and all those volunteers around the country. You're all amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina, for your dedication and commitment. And I would now like to welcome another passionate and dedicated volunteer leader, Miss Tricia Nolan. Tricia is... Woo! So Tricia's brought her fan club with her tonight. Tricia is the South County Dublin Volunteer Centre manager, and Tricia has dedicated her time over the last 2 years in assisting the volunteer operation, in fact, running the volunteer operation in the testing centre and vaccination centre in City West. So, Tricia, you're very welcome.
Sorry about that. Lads. Sorry. I don't think any of us will ever forget where we were on the 12th of March 2020 when the Taoiseach stood up in Washington and broadcast and basically asked us all to stay home. I actually remember I was in the middle of a quality review with my team and my board, and it turned out to be the fastest quality review in history. But I also remember that day for another reason. My phone rang that evening, and a lady from the HSE was on the phone asking us for some help for volunteers for a couple of days, maybe a week or two, in establishing the first community testing site in Tallaght Stadium in Ireland. 800 days later, and yes, I actually counted, 800 days, we are finally getting ready to say goodbye to the HSE as we finish our COVID journey later this month in testing and vaccination. In March 2020, our volunteer centre had already established a community volunteer programme. We called it the South Dublin Volunteer Corps. This had been established in partnership with South Dublin County Council, and its aim was to manage volunteers at events and festivals and possible emergencies in the county. And I suppose little did we realise the emergency coming our way. I think Nina has already referenced it, but I often think back on those early days in March and April in 2020 and look on the volunteers who put their hands up when we looked for help in Tallaght. I actually consider them the bravest people I ever met. We were watching images from northern Italy of the catastrophe that was emerging, and yet those citizens put up their hands as a deadly virus was circulating and said, "I'm ready to go out and help my fellow citizens." So they were quite amazing people. Since those early, long, exhausting, stressful days of 2020, we have worked with over 600 volunteers in the testing and vaccination sites in Tallaght, City West and Punchestown. Our volunteers have greeted, smiled at, supported and helped in excess of 1 million people. In that time, the volunteers have contributed over 70,000 volunteering hours. And even this evening, as we're all gathered here in the beautiful surroundings of Dublin Castle, there's a team of volunteers out in the new National Ukrainian Reception Centre in volunteering, or in City West, working through the night. So we haven't stopped. We're still going. My team sat together and we reflected on what message we wanted to give tonight to all of you. And we felt like there were so many stories we could tell, so many stories of bravery, of resilience, of courage. But the time is short, and so we thought we'd give 3 key messages for tonight. The first thing we wanted to say was volunteering isn't actually free. Our experience in Tallaght, and after that in City West and Punchestown, was remarkable. The stats I gave earlier just shows it was a huge group of people that were volunteering together. But in our time on site, with over 800 days of volunteering, there was never once that we had to say to the HSE that we didn't have enough volunteers to help. There were days when we were short of swabbers. There were days when we struggled to get enough vaccinators. COVID stretched us all, self-isolation and everything happened. But we never ever failed to show up and to have enough volunteers on site. And it's really important to note in City West that the volunteer requirement wasn't small. At the height of last summer, when we were vaccinating in excess of 6,000 people per day in City West, and we had a testing site running alongside that, we needed over 50 volunteers each day to work across multiple shifts. I used to joke with the HSE that these people didn't arrive on site by magic. We don't have a volunteer fairy that just swishes the wand and says, "Here we go, they're all here." To make this happen, we had a team from the Volunteer Centre working behind the scenes. They were recruiting, they were screening, they were selecting, they were scheduling, they were minding, they were caring for people, they were texting people, they were answering texts, and they were managing volunteers on a daily basis. We couldn't have done it without resources. Obviously, we're funded through the Department of Community and Rural Development, but extra funding came from the HSE, who saw the value and invested in the programme, including paying for several full-time volunteer managers to work in both City West and Punchestown. But what the HSE would say that in return on that investment can't be measured. So the first point we really wanted to make and our team reflected on was that if you invest in a volunteer programme, including it, resourcing it, the benefits are immeasurable. The second thing I wanted to say is that volunteers, and Nina has touched on it, bring something different to the table. Our volunteers have worked so hard over the last 2 years to bring a smile to people's faces. There was the kind word of reassurance to an anxious parent arriving to a testing site for the umpteenth time with their children. There was a joke or the banter with those facing long queues in the vaccination centre at the height of vaccination. And oftentimes we had our colleagues from the HSC tell us, we couldn't have done it without you. And the funny thing is, I always replied, of course you could. The national testing and vaccination would have happened anyway. The programme was a massive programme, it would have happened, but it wouldn't have been the same. And I think we all know this. Volunteers invariably sign up for volunteering because they want to be there, not because they have to be there. The friendly face, the willingness to go the extra mile from clients, including, and some of my team will attest to this, dressing up as cows, unicorns and dinosaurs for the children's vaccination programme. The chat and the crack with the kids. The words of encouragement to the anxious, long-suffering parent who's on their 5th visit to City West in 1 week, all made such a difference to the experience of people during COVID. In vaccination, we used to talk about volunteers walking the line. We used to have big, long queues in City West, and our volunteers used to walk along the line to actually identify people who needed extra support, people who may be on crutches, people who just couldn't stand for long times. It made the journey so much easier for people, especially those most in need of help. The focus of the HSE was to vaccinate the nation. It was clinically driven, and it was a race against time. And we wanted to help with that, but we also wanted to bring our own creativity and ingenuity to the table and to see beyond just the clinical nature of the vaccination programme. And I'm glad some people have talked about the piano programme. I'm delighted that I think Henrik and Nelson and Aileen are here tonight. But one of the things that happened in City West is myself and one of my colleagues were just kind of hanging out one day, and we were reflecting on seeing Yo-Yo Mai playing violin at a vaccination centre in the US, and we wondered if we could do something similar in City West. And we ran it by, the site lead was going home, and we ran it by the site lead, Phil, and we said, what would you think of us getting an old piano in here and getting someone to play a few bars? And she jumped at the idea, which was great. So we proceeded to convince City West Hotel to actually buy a piano. And then we went around recruiting volunteer piano players via IVAL. Soon we had over 30 piano players who signed up each day and went through the site, and the people who arrived went through the site to the strains of the most beautiful piano music. It was such a win-win. Piano players who hadn't played in such a long time got to perform again. Clients got to listen to beautiful music as they queued, and for our team on site, well, we had great crack because we were just being entertained all the time by the most fantastic piano players. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make here is that yes, City West would have absolutely continued to be the biggest and busiest vaccination site in the country, and 700,000 people would still have been vaccinated there. But for those of us working there and those being vaccinated there, it would have been a different, lesser, more difficult experience if there hadn't been a volunteering programme and volunteering presence. And finally, I just wanted to say that volunteering is a win-win. I'm so pleased to see so many of the City West team here tonight to receive thanks and praise which they rightly deserve. But if I was a betting woman, I would safely bet that all of them would tell you that they have gotten far more out of volunteering than they ever gave to it. And that's the beauty of a well-managed volunteer programme that gives meaningful, appropriate, purposeful work for those that are involved. From the beginning of COVID right through to today, our volunteers have spoken about what the programme has meant to them. For some, particularly those who were stuck at home for so long, they spoke about how volunteering gave them purpose and had a huge positive effect on their mental health. For others, the physical nature of work and testing, walking up and down around the cars, was a real bonus. I can see Kathy there, and I just know I used to hear the volunteers comparing step counts on busy days and being delighted to have them pass the 20,000 steps. For others, there was a huge sense of pride in being involved in what was a frontline national effort. It gave them purpose and meaning. It was something that they were delighted to share with family and friends. They just walked taller. But what always struck me was that we built a community together, a community of volunteers. We had a diverse group of people volunteering together, sharing stories, sharing meals, sharing breaks, helping each other, supporting each other, giving comfort on some very difficult days, having each other's back. And we had such a microcosm of society building that community. From airline pilots and airline engineers, hi Kyra, whose work had all but ceased, to single parents from disadvantaged communities who wanted to do their bit for the national effort. From retired Gardaí who volunteered and helped us with managing traffic through the site and giving us skills and directions on how to deal sometimes with some of our more impatient clients, to volunteers who took 2 buses from direct provision centres to help us every day. From retired people who wanted to use their spare time in a meaningful way to the scores of students who came to us late last summer during college downtime to help with the vaccination programme. We had families volunteering together, husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, grandparents and grandchildren. It's said that volunteering builds social capital. It is part of the glue that holds society together, and we truly witnessed that over the last 2 years. And I'm incredibly grateful and blessed that I got to be part of a journey with such a fantastic group of people. I'm so proud of you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Tricia, for your inspiration and your leadership. So now our final speaker this evening is a volunteer. Peter O'Brien is a long-standing and active member of Seapoint Rugby Club and also the driving force behind the Seapoint Dragon. And in 2020, Peter took on the demanding role of Club COVID Officer and has successfully guided the club through difficult times. And he also volunteered at the Aviva Test and Vaccination Centre. So Peter, I'd like to welcome you this evening.
Thanks, Barbara, Minister, Nina, Trish, and volunteering colleagues. You might know that Ireland's National Volunteer Strategy states that volunteering is any time willingly given, either formally or informally, for the common good and without financial gain. Now, it's said that one of the most common reasons given by many people who have never volunteered is that they were never asked. So when the scale and complexity of the vaccination and testing response was outlined, it was evident to me that there was a role for the volunteer. And when the volunteer centres requested people to express an interest in volunteering to support the delivery of these programmes, myself and thousands of men and women stepped forward. Such was the situation that faced us early in 2021, when despite the greatest threat to the health of the nation in my lifetime, there was hope, there was a roadmap, and there was a coming together of agencies, state resources, and communities to respond to the challenge. Volunteers came from all walks of life and backgrounds. Some recently retired like myself. More were unemployed due to the economic effects of the pandemic. Others volunteered as a result of the pandemic when they reassessed their lives and wanted to make a meaningful contribution to their communities. Many young people were volunteering for the first time, some having come from other countries to live in Ireland, while others were living in direct provision and wanted to play their part in supporting the country where they sought refuge. There were also volunteers who managed to volunteer alongside their full-time jobs. We must not forget the volunteers we did not see, who made their contribution also. To those who acted as childminders so that a parent could volunteer or looked after an older relative or vulnerable person to free up another volunteer to attend their shift, we pay a tribute to them also on this occasion. The reason people volunteered are as diverse as the individuals who responded to the call of action. But we all had one thing in common. We felt we had something to offer. One of the first questions that a volunteer usually asks is, what is expected of me and who will show me what to do? That is where my volunteer colleagues and I were fortunate in having the support of those centres associated with Volunteer Ireland. Like any volunteer workforce, volunteers have to be trained and managed, and those who managed our volunteers went above and beyond the call of duty. Whether it was ensuring a good supply of biscuits for the break or liaising with the medical team to keep everyone safe, our managers were not found wanting and all were exceptional. I'm sure all of us who volunteered experienced an array of emotions during our time as volunteering at the centres. In particular, in times of pressure, when queues were long, when buildings were too hot or too cold, when patients sometimes understandably became impatient. As volunteers, we had fun, we had crack, we made friends, we shared our stories, and we looked after each other. Any words of annoyance that was directed at us were soon forgotten amid the thanks and words of encouragement from patients coming through the doors of the centres. Our roles included welcoming and guiding the patients through the process. We met the vulnerable, the frightened, and the frail. We tried to cajole, coax, and encourage those who were nervous or reassure those who made it as far as the cubicle, but then were reluctant to go further. We were inspired and humbled by the older patient who abandoned their isolation for the first time in months and came to the centre for their vaccination. We were moved by those with a disability and the carers who accompanied them, anxious in anticipation of what was to come. We tried to assure the children and their parents, nervous about the procedure, that would protect their young lives, and we were motivated by the courage of those patients with a serious illness who visited the centre in the hope that the vaccination would shield them from a virus that presented yet another challenge to their life. But trust and respect had to be earned among our volunteer colleagues, and in particular among the medical and security staff who we supported at the centres. After a sometime edgy beginning, the relationship between volunteers and staff at centres grew in respect and trust. There was an understandable wariness among medical and health administrators as to how volunteers would fit into an awful stressful environment. Equally, there was an anxiousness on behalf of the volunteers to demonstrate that they were there to support the staff, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the volunteer had suggestions worth listening to as to how the patient's experience could be enhanced. All of us volunteers came to admire the professionalism of the nurses and doctors who delivered the testing and vaccination programme at the centres where we served. The patience, good humour, understanding and empathy of the medical staff in attending to the public will always be associated with my memories as a volunteer. The skills and tolerance of the security staff at the centres when dealing with members of the public was also appreciated. The safety of the volunteers was of equal importance to the protection of others working at the centre and was always provided with firmness and humour. We also remember those unsung staff who administered the programmes behind the registration desks, who I am sure often wondered were the volunteers a help or a hindrance. Although we often blamed them in jest when things went awry, I feel they always appreciated the role of the volunteers in the centre. Though volunteers would not always seek it, the recognition for the support or assistance which we freely gave is much appreciated. So when the nurses, doctors, administrators, security staff and other volunteers were called together at the closing of the centre where I worked in the Avida Stadium, the many words of thanks and appreciation were then expressed. However, the words of gratitude that I and many more of us as volunteers cherished and will remember was the acknowledgement that we were very much included as part of the team who delivered the programme. Many of us, I hope we'll make ourselves available for volunteering opportunities in the future. Hopefully, it will not be in response to a similar challenge to public health, but if needs be, I'm sure we will be willing. The state and state agencies have witnessed the skills and competencies that volunteers can bring to a role. Personally, I feel that there is a role for volunteers in meeting the challenges faced by our health services. Roles that support and not substitute those working in the health service. For example, volunteers have been invited to act in a supportive role to patients attending the Oncology and Haematology Department of Tala University Hospital here in Dublin. And I'm sure there are many other volunteer opportunities. The state and our government departments should take note of the role played by volunteers in response to the pandemic. Our elected politicians should recall that once they were volunteers themselves, who through their local political activism felt, and hopefully still feel, that they've something to offer our society for the betterment of the people in our community. Volunteers too have a lot to contribute, and not only in times of emergency. When volunteers who have been involved with the testing and vaccination programme over the past number of months reflect on their experience, I hope that, like me, you will feel that you made a difference in protecting the health of your fellow citizen. I hope that you've been enhanced by the experience, and whatever skills you have gained, that you will find a use for them in supporting others in the future. I trust you have a better understanding and appreciation of our health professionals. Above all, I hope, again like me, you can feel a sense of pride and privilege to have played a small but significant part in addressing the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic through your service as a volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to each and every person who volunteered during that very difficult and challenging time we had in COVID-19. So now it's time for a very special welcome, as we have a number of young, talented artists with us this evening. And these young artists are the ones who made it possible for the government to produce a wonderful commemorative badge to thank all of the volunteers who took part in our national effort. This badge, which I'm wearing, I hope that many of you would have gotten one when you arrived. If you haven't received one, we will have more at the tables outside when you're leaving. So I want to say a big thank you to all of the winners of the competition that was held to design the badge. To Nora, Kyra, Janaea, Rebecca, Nicole and Laurice for their fabulous designs. We are very grateful that you all responded to the call to represent the great efforts of the volunteers who are being celebrated this evening. Art is not just what you see, but what you make others see. And through your creativity, you've brought colour and shape and captured in your art what volunteering is and how it helps other people. So like volunteering, art enables us to find ourselves and to lose ourselves at the same time. And your beautiful artwork has helped us to show these volunteers how much their enthusiasm, energy and effort matters to us all. And I hope you'll continue to bring colour and joy to the world through your artwork. And perhaps as you get a little older, you might think of volunteering in other ways too, because there's always a role for each and every one of us in helping others. So I want to congratulate and thank all of our artists again, and also to thank and acknowledge their parents and their teachers. And I would like to invite each of them now up to the stage for a presentation from Minister of State Joe O'Brien. So our first person to come up is Kyra Lynch from St Mark's Senior National School, Tala in Dublin. So Kyra, together with her friends Janea Algetti, Rebecca Kovaci, are our Leinster winners. And next up then is our Munster winner, Nicole Stevens from Coolmeen National School, County Clare. Well done, Nicole. And our Ulster winner is Laurice Solnevs and is represented here this evening by Ms. Siobhan McGroarty on behalf of Laurice from Killian National School in Frosses in County Donegal. And finally, the winner of the national competition and the Connacht winner is Nora Doe and her principal, Mrs. Burke, from St. Paul's National School, Collooney, County Sligo. So Nora's beautiful design is the one you find on the badge you have. And as I said, if you didn't get a badge coming in, make sure to get one before you go. So thank you and congratulations once again to all of our winners. Very well done. So now, to bring the proceedings to a close, I would like to thank Minister O'Brien and all our speakers this evening, and also our sign language interpreter, Ms. Frankie Berry. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank Volunteer Ireland, the local authorities, and the volunteer centres who assisted the department in organising this celebration and all of the many local events that are happening around the country. And finally, last but not least, I would like to thank my own team in the department, led by Kyra Bates, who put so much work into making this evening a success. Jennifer, Aoife, Breda, Niamh, Elaine, Ellie, Ben and Alan. Thank you guys so much. It's been wonderful. So as I said, tonight is a celebration, and when we celebrate, we have a party. So we hope that you can stay with us now to continue the celebrations. There will be food, there will be more drink, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you all very much.